All right, welcome to the quarterfinals of MNUDC 2022. On the motion, this House supports Japan repealing Article 9 of its constitution. I call this House to order and yield the floor to the Honorable Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Guys, Japan is just not having a good time right now. It's not fun being neighbors with the two of the most aggressive and the most expansionist countries in the world, China and Japan, while also being reliant on a country like the US that has historically shown a track record of flip-flopping their foreign policies through just disastrous presidencies. At the end, so there are 3 things I'll prove to you in my speech. Firstly, why Article 9 historically is not something that's justified for Japan to follow. Secondly, I'll prove to you why Article 9 puts Japan in a bad geopolitical position. And lastly, I'll prove to you why repealing it will allow Japan to counter the problems that they are facing geopolitically. At the end of this speech, we'll prove to you that Japan has every right for them to repeal Article 9 and begin militarization of their own country. But before that, what exactly is Article 9? Article 9 is basically a part of the constitution that was implemented during World War II, after World War II, during the reconstruction of Japan after the 2 nuclear bombs were dropped by the US, that states that Japan must be a pacifist country and ought not to have any military or a military size that allows them to be offensive. That means then that they are allowed to be defensive, but often the military that is defending them is severely limited in size via the constitution. That's why they have the JDF, but it doesn't have the best amount of military tech. It doesn't have the most amount of personnel, nor does it have a standing air force, right? So firstly, why exactly is it that Article 9 is not something that's justified for them to have? Notice the way that Article 9 was implemented within Japan. When was it implemented? It was implemented during the reconstruction of modern day Japan, while the US was taking over as an intermediary government that like governing over the people of Japan. And they implemented that constitution or the part of the constitution early on when people did not have the ability to decide their own constitution or their ability or their governments, right? What that means then is that it's basically a foreign power literally deciding the constitution of a foreign people, deciding whether or not they should have a military or not. What that means is that it's a simple case of coercion when it comes to whether or not coercion in their constitutions, the literal heart of their country. We think that this imposition is something that's unjustified and therefore should not be there in the first place. We think then that it's completely justified for Japan with its popularity towards repealing Article 9 to remove Article 9 from the Constitution, given that it has the popularity on the ground or because of the geopolitical context that it has. But number 2 is because of the fact that they ought to be able to decide their own destiny and their own constitution. We think then that on a principle, on a net, it is far more justified for you to repeal Article 9. Given that, let's move on to the geopolitical aspect of this debate. Firstly, why geopolitically Japan is in a dangerous position? There are 3 reasons for this. Firstly, in terms of tensions between countries and their neighbors, there are 3 examples of this. Firstly, China versus Japan, right? The fact is that China is trying to expand into Japanese territory. We've already seen them through their expansionist policies in the South China Sea, but also towards governing or patrolling areas like, for example, the Senkaku Island. They keep sending naval fleets. They keep sending patrols. They keep sending or trying to build artificial islands in order to boost up their military presence over there. But secondly, it's also Russia against Japan. The fact is that Russia is also trying to take over a lot of the chunk of Japan's islands, right? The Kuril Islands north of Hokkaido. But the fact is, Russia is becoming more aggressive right now, and we've already seen Russia trying to invade Ukraine because of the fact that they want the resources in Ukraine. We don't see any reason. We can see, or it's plausible for us to assume that Russia probably wants to take Kuril Islands as well. 3, notice that all of these countries have strongman leaders that show a tendency to be aggressive in order to have for them to have power in the first place. What that means is that all of these countries literally have an incentive to be expansionist in order for them to retain power. In conclusion, then, we say that the neighbors that China, like Japan has, is just shit and probably will try to engage with Japan as soon as they can. Secondly, what are the allies that Japan has, and how is it that they're able to stave off for as long as they? The reason why is because they've been reliant on the US, right? But there's the US having their own military base there. But the problem is that it's extremely problematic for two reasons. Firstly, the US right now is literally too focused on Europe for decades to come because of Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, right? The fact that most of its military is trying to beef up or assure NATO that they will be able to defend its members in, like, for example, and sending most of its troops in, for example, in Poland, for example, to show that we'll be able to defend you in the event of Russia. That means that most of the East Asian theater is left wide open for China or Japan to take over. But secondly, US foreign policy is always dependent on presidents. We've already seen the US being shit with their presidents, right? We've seen Trump, and we think that there's always been a trend for like Republicans to become hyper isolationist or hyper nationalist, and we think that Republicans have never taken any steps to prevent that. The next election is likely to be Republican, given that like Biden is probably losing the next election because of his approval ratings. Thirdly, now in conclusion, the US is extremely unreliable as an ally. Thirdly, then, what is the current Japanese military composition? We think that JDF is currently restricted in size. No Navy, no Air Force. Therefore, even if the opposition says that there's a JDF in order for you to defend Japan, we say that it's not enough because of the fact that it's severely limited through the Constitution. Before I conclude this issue, Pure.
Don't you think that having an actual military would give a signaling to Russia and China that Japan is actually afraid of them, meaning the chances of them invading is higher?
Of course, like, everyone's scared of Japan and Russia. What the fuck do you think they're doing right now? They're literally invading countries around the world. Why the fuck would you think that they're not scared? Moving on, why is this extremely important? Firstly, Japan is unable to defend its territories against aggressive neighbors. Secondly, Japan is extremely reliant on unreliable allies such as the US. What happens then when you repeal Article 9? Japan gets to build a navy and air force and a standing army that is probably bigger than what they have in the JDF, right? Why is this important? Firstly, it massively improves their defensive capacity. It means then that they're already able to defend against expansionist neighbors like, for example, Russia and China. Given that they're already the fourth biggest economy in the world, they're probably enough to overpower Russia in terms of military capacity, but also in terms of giving a sizable enough blow to China in order to prevent them to even consider invading Japan or its territories. But secondly, you no longer become reliant on the US in order to become defensive or to prevent invasion against expansionist neighbors like Russia or China. We think that this is a definite benefit in itself because it means that Japan becomes independent and its people gets to decide its own fate and its own future. For all of those reasons, I've never been prouder to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for that speech and call the next speaker, Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear. Hello?
Just give me a few seconds.
All right.
More audible and visible. Just give me a few seconds.
Audio's great.
Only change. All right. Ow. No perfect gender pronouns. My name is Haikal. I'll take POI through chat. I'll begin my speech in 3. I'll take around 5. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The purpose of any policy in a country is to reflect the value of the people itself. That is to say, any policy that is morally unrepresentative is unjustified, and especially true if you have to actually revoke what people have believed in. Let's just set up the burden of this debate. right? The burden on op is very simple. We just have to prove to you why exactly there are always there are more harm than goods when you repeal this constitution, this article within this constitution. But secondly, we also can prove to you how exactly like status quo is actually far more beneficial compared to the world that opposition or government tries to defend. Note that they didn't actually provide any counterfactual whatsoever. They just said that there's a harm, so therefore we should actually like change, we should actually repeal it, right? On the other side of the house, they actually have to prove why exactly it's beneficial. I'm just going to rebut every single thing that they have proved, right? But so a few things that they say, right, coming from PM. The first thing that they claim is that, well, yeah, we implemented it during after the war itself, where like US are the one who actually coerced Japan to actually accept this article itself. Number one, note that this is kind of weird, right? If it's true that actually like they are being coerced, right, they probably have table and try to actually change it in the first place, right? I don't think that they actually want to change this. That means that they are actually not being coerced. Why? The fact is they have been trying to table like this thing from 1980s, but every single time they table it, they never gotten like the majority. Note that they actually need that 2/3 majority, but they haven't even gotten a simple majority to actually like table and pass this thing. I'm unsure why exactly the coercion comes from. I'm going to prove why principally this article is justified, but note that as well that they haven't proved why exactly unjustified. The second thing that I'm going to deal with is the fact that they say that but China, like Japan is like in between China and also Russia and China actually wants to invade Japan, right? Let's have just meta response first. The fact is, I'm unsure why exactly like China actually wants to invade their like biggest partner in the first place. Even if like they are expansionists, they probably don't care about Japan that much. They probably care about like Hong Kong and Taiwan a lot more. I'm unsure what exactly the link they built here. Secondly, Russia cares a lot more about the Soviet countries compared to Japan. I'm unsure why exactly Russia actually going to come this. They haven't proven that as well. Thirdly, the fact is, even if it's true that they say that, but now like you are able to militarize to defend yourself, note that how exactly are you going to actually defend against Russia? The fact is, if you are saying that Russia is super big and super strong and you need to defend them, how exactly adding a bit more like naval ship to actually defend them is going to work? I'm unsure why exactly they prove that. Fourthly is that I think that they just claim, well, US doesn't really care about Russia, doesn't really care about Japan that much, right? Note that this doesn't make sense at all. They haven't proved to us why exactly, aside from saying that, well, US actually care about EU more. But the fact is, if it's true that US actually want to combat Russia, and especially true because of like the Ukraine invasion, and especially true they also want to combat China like hegemony itself, they are more likely to actually defend Japan because of the fact that they want to actually ensure that Japan doesn't go to like Russia or China. Note that they haven't proven anything on their side of the house. There's no harm. Therefore, they already lost this debate itself because their case is literally depend and then on the efficacy. They haven't proven why exactly it works, right? Few things that two arguments then. Firstly, why exactly the Article 9 is actually morally justified, right? There are two debate. The first is about the principle of accountability. The reason why this articles has been created in the first place is for them to actually take the responsibility for the action they have committed during the World War II itself. This is why we have the Article 9 in the first place, right? They pledge to actually take a responsibility and try to avoid any kind of violence in the future. As to say, they become more pacifist in the first place. The reason this is morally important because it's already embedded within the people itself. People already take the responsibility, like the society within Japan already take their responsibility, and they're always concerned about like the responsibility of themselves and their country itself. The second thing I'm going to note here as well is that Germany is also a good parallel to this, because the fact is Germany are the one who actually like German are responsible for like what happened within like World War I, right? When like the Nazi happens, right? And I think it is important because Germany like they take a stance of like pacifist simply because of the fact that they feel responsible for their action, and they always never actually say that we're going to go to war simply because of the fact that they already feel responsible for what they did. The second principle I'm going to argue here is about reparation itself. The fact is when Japanese imperialism and colonization has caused a lot of like trauma and also dehumanization towards all countries that have invaded within the World War II itself, right? For example, the Korea Comfort Women's actually harms a lot of women within Korea, which they actually like ask Japan to actually take responsibility for it. Or like Malaysia, where they actually like invade Malaysia and rape a lot. They rape a lot of people and kill a lot of people itself. We think it is important because the only way for them to actually be remorseful is to actually stop being violent whatsoever and try to actually give some kind of reparation in the form of like not try to actually be violent anymore. The third principle here is that why exactly that is going to be bad for the victimhood itself. That's to say that it's actually a spit to victims, all of the Japan's victims, simply because of the fact that you are not actually like you suddenly becoming like violence again simply because of the fact that you are saying that it's okay to be violent and stuff, right? All of this proof is that this article actually represents the value of the people, and it is justified. For Gulf to win this, they have to defend that like revoking this means that they're going for a more immoral policy itself. This argument already win us the debate. Before I move on, Article P1.
Yeah, if my grandfather kills someone, am I responsible for the murder of that person? Why do you put Japanese people at fault for the sins of their forefathers?
Well, because technically, like the reason why they create this policy in the first place is because of what they did in the past, right? But note that as well, just because like it's already happened in the past, it does not mean that the future also cannot actually take responsibility. The fact is like the victim also, like the victim of like Korea already actually enforced the idea that the Japanese government should actually take responsibility for what they did. They actually have to act responsible more. The second argument why exactly repealing is bad for the interest of the country itself. The first thing I'm going to argue here is that the two things to note here is that Japan has and some kind of self-preservation to actually protect themselves, and secondly, they want to maintain their global image itself because that's how they are able to actually like get a lot of like, political capital. What happens when you actually repeal? Number one, you are seen as a force that can actually like go into a war and actually militarize. This is what coming from Arshad itself, right? We think it's very terrible for you to do that simply because of the fact that the state any kind of state will simply doesn't have the full trust towards you if you have like a very huge military, and especially true where there is a huge military tension between you and them. This is why Japan are the only country are able to actually broker a peace deal with Russia, even though Russia is a rogue state, simply because of the fact that Russia doesn't actually scared of like Japan because of like their pacifist stance. This is important because that means that you are able to actually get a lot of peace deal. But the second thing is about like bridging the country itself. It's important for you to know that they doesn't have any soft power because of like they are trading their military power for a soft power. Means that a lot of the time we are able to actually use Japan as a way to actually bridge the hegemony and bridge the country itself, which is far important because this country usually needs some kind of safe space to actually negotiate. This proves that at the point where you repeal, you lose the capability to actually broker all these deals and the political capital for you to actually create change within the world itself. For these reasons, vote for.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech and call the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Can you check if I'm audible?
It's a bit soft, but I can hear you.
Is it better now? Is it better now? Audio.
I thank the DPM for that speech and call upon the dialogue. Hear, hear.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yep, audio is fine.
Oh, all right. Gov can't even pronounce the names of the islands that allegedly Russia is trying to invade in the borders of Japan, which just proves that it's just not really that big of a deal in the Japanese frontier. I'll prove to you more reasons why Russia doesn't particularly care that much about expanding eastward, but rather they care so much more expanding in the European front. But just to note that even if you buy this argument that there is a lot of power that Russia has in expanding against Japan, this doesn't actually prove why a militarizing all-out missile pointing towards Russia is principally and morally justified. At best, it proves that Japan should just
engage more with Russia, which we provide a counterfactual why it's likely. They haven't proven to us why this is the tipping point for militarizing, given that even during the Cold War, we didn't repeal this. You have to say why Ukraine-Russia war is that big of a deal to Japan. Their arguments are just inherently less important. I'll give you some just grounding and just a fact check for our government side, and I'll give you some principle weighing as to how reparations and this principle is more, and this policy is morally legitimate, and repealing it is morally abhorrent, right? The first thing I'll say is that their argument is premised on efficacy, right? They're just saying that geopolitics will be far worse off, or is currently escalating to a point where Russia is about to expand into the Japanese islands. Number one, their arguments, and if you listen to the language of the first two speakers, is just say, well, it's plausible that China and Russia could go and take over Japanese islands. They haven't actually proven any track record as to how this is literally going to happen, nor have they actually proven why why Russia and China is willing to militarize and bomb people within these islands and within these instances. It's unlikely that it's going to happen a lot of the times. But second response in meta here is that sure, your arguments in deputy can just say, oh, everyone is just escalating their budgets of military, but that's just an argument to prove that they have bigger militaries. It's not an argument to prove that you should also militarize, nor is it an argument to prove why Russia and China will point these military weapons towards Japan. Although you prove that they are increasing, you haven't proven why this incentive is actually matching with what you're actually doing, which is repealing. It is unclear what is their direction. I'll just prove why Russia is not going to expand to Japan for a lot of reasons, and I'll use the same exact line of logic. If they say US is literally has so much stuff on their plate, Russia also has so much stuff on their plate. They're in a Ukraine-Russia war. They have oil problems because of the energy crisis. They are dealing with internal problems of just opposition parties within Russia. All these things just simply prove that Russia has no time to care about Japan, insofar as even you yourself argue that a country only has a limited amount of interest. It is incredibly unclear why Russia is going to use so much political capital as Vladimir Putin to just invade Japan or take over Japanese islands for literally no reason. I've already proven it's unlikely for them to threaten Japan. There is no real urgency. I'll deal with the best case scenario of combating against Japan as well. Now, they're saying, okay, let's believe your argument. Russia is expanding against Japan. What is your comparative then? If you repeal, what will you do? They're saying we're gonna increase the budget and we're gonna have a little bit bigger navy and a little bit better technology. Note that we've already proven it's unlikely to happen. But the second meta commentary I have is that this relies on the Japanese military becoming more effective in defending against Russian expansionism, right? You have to then prove why Japanese military is going to compete against Russian military. Couple of reasons why this will never, Japan, if this does happen, it will not end well. Number one, Japan just doesn't have enough sophisticated military technology against Russia. Russia has a already set military. They have training camps. They have so much people, human resources. It means you can obviously, if Russia was that crazy to go and attack Japan, they would absolutely annihilate Japan if that does happen, because and it doesn't particularly matter even if you increase your budget. But secondly, what is then the counterfactual? If you want to buy government's argument is we want self-defense. You would have to rely on your current trade partners to fund all of your military, given that they also concede the US and Japan are already morally and economically intertwined. It is comparatively likely that US is going to fund Japanese military and put a lot of military technology and put missiles within Japan, the same way US is doing with Korea, which is their other trade partner. This is the comparative that government has to deal with. What are the harms to this? Number one, you are literally putting a sign on your back that, hey, I am a US military proxy on your eastern front, Russia. This is just horrible, because then Russia has more than enough reason to expand against you now. I've already proven this line of analysis just proves that it's unlikely that Russians will expand in Japanese islands on status quo. But once you accept aid and military technology from Japan, that becomes the tipping point for Russia to actually care and expand towards you. And the second reason why Russia would likely expand towards you and create more havoc on that side of the house is because geographically they're just comparatively way more closer, right? Now they have to care about their eastern front as well. That means you are putting Japan up for threats by Russia and by China. At the end of the day, this means you lose capital. We take before I move on to KPI.
Look, the comparative is literally having no military, and therefore it's far easier for Russia to literally just walk in and take islands, or China to take the Senpaku Islands. What is the comparative on your side and defend it?
Yeah, the comparative is Japan has gotten so much soft power and political goodwill, the point in which when you do not have a military. And the reason for this is because once you don't have a military, rogue actors do not look to you as a threat. The reason why rogue actors look to you as a threat is because you have a capability to go and attack them. That's why whenever Russia is engaging with negotiations with US, there's always military tension. There is always a climate of paranoia. But when Russia brokers deals with Japan, there is never that same level of paranoia because Russia doesn't have to like justify their concerns because Japan will never attack them. This just proves that on our side of the house, we get to protect ourselves through the trust that we can have with Russia just by being politically neutral. Even if you don't buy any of our comparatives, they haven't proven any of their links. They are just completely just untrue in every single step of the way. We take this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Biola, for that speech and call the government whip. Here.
Hi, can I check if I'm audible?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Hang on.
Sorry.
Kendra,
Speaking.
can you help time?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Sarihan. I shall be government whip. I'll take POIs in the chat around 5. Other than that, if I'm clear, I shall start my speech in 3, 2. Japan was coerced into Article 9 by the same country who screams bloody democracy. Then they had to depend on that same country for military support and then trade. There is a principal right for Japan to repeal Article 9 because it's the interest of upholding sovereignty, but also because the repealing is in the best interest of US, who coerced it in the Constitution in the very first place. We don't think that we received any form of substantive responses towards this principal argument. Therefore, it stands. We'll still engage in the comparative later. Government argues the following: 1, that the principle of Article 9 is democratically unjustified. 2, it is geopolitically strategic and necessary for Japan to militarize. This was then misconstrued under opposition because they simply assumed that the debate is about an all-out war happening. That's not the debate. The debate is about territory expansionism and hard power for Japan to actually gain more bargaining power and for diplomatic actions to later take suit. That does not exist in status quo. But third, we argue that it increases that bargaining power for Japan in terms of its dependency as well as in the global sphere, which results in like affirming sovereignty, but most importantly, security for themselves, right? Ops case is then contingent on 2 things. That number 1, this has no public support. We'll prove you it has, and even if it doesn't, we're able to build it or we're able to get it either way. But second, that you don't want to escalate tensions with China and Russia. But according to them, it's only with Russia. China doesn't exist in the debate, right? We say it exists in both, and that threat is ever so there. Plus, you have to engage in the characteristics that we're talking about strongman leaders who just need a win. So if Russia and Ukraine are having like tensions that are ever so high, they can have all the money in the world to also still get Kuril Islands, right? And then plus the fact that Russia has already started to militarize Kuril Islands is an added fact of that. What is the context of this debate? We say that obviously it's not going to start as an all-out war because Arshad himself told you the incentives of Japan of wanting to reclaim their lands as the first means of like militarizing themselves. Plus, there is also the context of democracy that, you know, there's no backsliding to democracy and there's no incentive for Japan to like repeat its sins during World War II. I'll expand on that in issue 1. Is repealing Article 9 a justified act? 2 metrics to judge this on. Number 1, the principle of democracy, but second, can we get public support? A. SACP pacified Japan after setting off atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't make it a sunset clause, none engaged with in some speech, but they invaded the constitution, right? The very heart of your country. But then they also made Japan, that was already a victim to a fascist state and lack of democratic institutions to help prevent it, the people in Japan that were already suffering, they made Japan dependent on that. Regardless, Japan still got to where they are today. Yeah, we agree with all the soft power, that Japan has, but we don't think it should be exclusive. We think they can have both of those soft power and as well as hard power. But the nuance then that is exclusive to our side is because of that soft power existing alongside hard power, they're unlikely to become, the ultra right wing individuals that they were back in World War II. But B, has Japan answered for their sins? Yes, they reparated comfort women in South Korea. They're actively helping Malaysia's economy. And like when we're talking about global image, do people really give a shit about what Japan did in World War II? Sure, they're able to accept it as history. Sure, they're able to accept that it is wrong and it is war crimes, but understand that they are like one of the only countries that is held to that extent, aside from like Germany, when it comes to the crimes that they committed back then. US isn't held to that same standard. But when you're talking about global image, soft power in entertainment, they're allowed to compete in the Olympics, their position at world conferences like UN General Assembly is heavily appreciated by the global sphere. That is to say, Japan is a strong actor there in itself. But that is also to say the global community isn't fully interested in supporting Japan to actually further its means of increasing security. But see, there's no backsliding to democracy. The reason as to why this is true is because the incentives Japan has back then and what they have now is two completely different things, right? Back then, obviously, they wanted to spread the ideology of communism or like uphold their monarchy and stuff like that. They don't have that same institution here. The reason as to why they were the way that they were back then is because there was no institution strong enough to oppose fascism. We have that now. Post Shinzo Abe, you also see Japan actively progressing to becoming more progressive, right? We think that those things happen due to their own analysis of there is no public support. The nuance they're missing out of this public support is the fact that it is ever increasing in the very first place. The popularity of Article 9 is something that Japan is able to acknowledge to happen like in a democratic stance. That's why when people were against it in the first place, they were like, okay, we're not going to do anything about it. That's why when people were protesting, they were allowed to protest peacefully, right? Like Japan has shown great interest in preserving their democracy, but it also gives incentive to Japan to also provide reasons as to why Article 9 should still be repealed. And those reasons are things like establishing interest groups that advocate for why those things have to happen. It's also governments and public officials including it in their speech saying we have to increase protection and US isn't doing anything to help us because they're preoccupied with the thing going on in Ukraine and Russia. Next thing, what's the comparative then? You have an opposition that listens to the will of the people, but stay at risk against notoriously aggressive militants of China and Japan. But second, you also lose sovereignty and remain dependent on US, who is like too busy to help you. But under our side, we recognize this and we say the thing that's happening is active lobbying power with the people and an incentive for Japan to become more democratically progressive at the end of the day. Before I go to second issue, PY.
Being pacifist means you have military enough to defend yourself, but no one wants to invade you because of you are pacifist, and they have highest protection because they're significant as them being Russia peace broker. On your side, you lose this unique trait and you antagonize Russia even more.
I know you guys are all boys, but damn, you're aggressive. The debate isn't about direct invasion. It's about territory expansionism. It's about the interest of Japan to protect or reclaim its lands and islands. Calm down. Issue number 2, is this beneficial for Japan? A, everybody is scared of Japan and Russia. We understand that. But like when they say Russia is too busy with Ukraine, it's still Russia. They need a damn win. Even if they don't, they will pretty soon. If the war is over, will you be in support of repealing Article 9 then? But then China is also an aggressor in this debate and they're actively intimidating Japan with like naval ships and stuff like that. This happens because Japan has no bargaining power to bring them to the diplomatic table and like talk about it or like try to reclaim in a diplomatic way, right? Understand that diplomatic actions can only happen under our side when Japan is able to militarize and has that bargaining power in the first place. Russia and China has no incentives to sit at international treaties or be diplomatic because all they have to do in status quo is send out some naval ships to intimidate you, right? But see, your current trade partners will be affected by see. They're in question whether or not Japan's trade partners will be in support of them or will be okay with funding them militarizing. Of course they will, because they are your allies as well. They are under that same threat against China and Russia. US is there. US will be in support because at least they don't have to carry the burden by themselves. But even if they're not, the lack of security for Japan themselves to preserve that security and lose that island is a threat to that trade deals in the very first place. The conclusion of our case is simple. It is the fact that this is a principal right to repeal Article 9 that was unjustly put there, and the fact that it is most beneficial for Japan. Thank you.
Thank the government whip and call the opposition whip. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, audio is fine.
Okay. All right, starting my speech in 3. Oh, sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think government's whip missed out a lot of things. Opposition didn't assume that this debate is going to be an all-out war. No, opposition assumes that when you antagonize them by having over-militarization across Japan to make sure that you can basically fend yourself against against Russia and China, then it's going to be an all-out war. From the get-go, we've been trying to say that antagonization has never been a way, especially for a pacifistic country like Japan, who already has a lot of allies for being nice. Suddenly, you want to say that you have much more public support because you want to defend yourself. In any way whatsoever, this doesn't become in any way logical in any way whatsoever, right? Before I move on to like 4 points of my rebuttals, I have 2 issues I'd like to bring to this debate today. First and foremost is a principal clash. Does pacifism trump over self-defense? And number 2, which side will have over-militarization that is going to lead to much larger repercussions? Before I move on to all those things, few pieces of rebuttal. Number 1, like what Whip said, is that strongman leaders like China and Russia is in desperate need of a win. First and foremost, we've given you a lot of analytical support to say on how is it that, like, you know, just most of the time, these countries wouldn't even want to invade in the first instance. But even if, let's say, for example, they do want to invade, let's take government's logic, right? They say that America has too much on their plate to basically give support to like Japan in the first instance. Then we can also say Russia has a lot of things on their plate as well. They're literally losing the war against losing the war against Ukraine because of the fact that they overestimated the Ukraine forces, as well as just the international support that they got from, like, you know, the world, right? Meaning to say here, probably the same scale of help from like the international alliance can actually be given towards Japan as well. Meaning to say that you don't necessarily need to have a militarization you don't necessarily need to have a military to ensure that Japan can win in order for them to defend themselves against strongman leaders like Russia and China. But it also means that it's going to be much worse under your side. But apart from just Russia, let's take a look at China, right? China also has a lot of things on their plate. Number 1, they're still in negotiations on wanting to support Russia or not. But number 2, they still have Hong Kong and Taiwan to fend, like, to look after themselves, right? Meaning to say here, if you want to say that everyone has something on their plate, then it's not going to happen under your side as well, right? But then they say that, okay, government said that America is bad because of how they have like bad precedents in the first instance. And then they want to say that Russia and China is also bad. The problem is, their only mechanization now is they want to rely on defense for, like, they want to rely on having like military for Japan in order for them to defend themselves. Number 1, they didn't really prove the efficacy of this. But number 2, Japan is so damn tiny. How are you able to basically defend yourself against legit big strongmen like you claim, like Russia and like China? Japan is just one tiny island. And if you say that America is not going to help them anyways, then under your side, you're basically going to be demolished as a country as a whole. And it's going to happen much likelier because of the way you antagonize them. So sure, if you want to say that you want to save the lives of Japanese people, I'm pretty sure it's better for you to don't like give them military power at the end of the day. And last but not least, they say that, okay, it's because of how you have military support, then you're going to have much more public support. I'm pretty sure that when you don't engage in a war, you can have much more military support because you are not involved in a humanitarian conflict. That's it. moving on to my first issue for the principle then. Does pacifism trump over self-defense? What government claims is that China and Russia right now are the biggest threat, and because of how America is just a shit ally in general. Two pieces of problems I have with this. Number one is just the lack of justification for rights to self-defense. The only line of analysis they're given to ensure that they have some form of justification to rights for self-defense is that Article 9 was made under the force of coercion. We've already given you plenty of analysis to say that over the years, even after like America basically, quote unquote, coerced Japan into doing so, they have a lot of debates on whether or not they should like basically, repeal the article. But in most instances, they did not repeal the article. So I didn't see any form of coercion here. Like even if coercion did happen at the point of their making the constitution, even after they have their own right to self-governing and they have their own capacity to basically lead their own country, they still didn't repeal the article regardless, right? Meaning to say that being a pacifism in Japan is one that is their basically innate right for them to be a good country that they are right now. But the other part to here is like, like the principle of just saying that you have to take accountability. What they say is that, okay, sure, Japan has done a lot of reparation for all the comfort women. And then if they were to go to war right now, people wouldn't care because those are the mistakes in the past. Look, the principle here is the same. Whatever is wrong in the past, it's still wrong in the future. Meaning to say here, the fact that you're basically spitting on the victimhoods of the people who actually suffer, probably from the same degree of like where they live in, is one that is large, right? Meaning to say, to a certain degree, people are still going to be offended. The fact that you've already promised the same people that you kind of did some damage towards your ancestors, and now you say you want to go back on your own word. We say principally it's just wrong, right? What do you prefer under our world? Is this a bigger or degree of principle, right? We say that the world views you as a peaceful country. This means that you're trading military power for that soft power, and this is basically being said by my first speaker, right? Because of how you are able to be the broker of peace between nations, meaning the impacts here are large. Number one, you have more trust within Japanese people in the first instance, meaning countries all over the world will recognize you as a peace state and you are the broker of peace. But number two, you have a lesser political backlash for involving in regional conflict. And number three, you have a higher chance of having more allies at the point where you actually don't involve yourself in this regional conflict. Before I do the weighing, let me take a POI.
Look, by your logic, like every country with a military wouldn't be able to trade with each other because, they have a military, therefore I don't want to trade with you. How does that logic make sense in the context?
Logically speaking, right, if you have a beef with your neighbor has a knife and you have a knife, chances of you playing knife with each other is higher. Comparatively speaking, your neighbor has a knife, you're there being the nice person, and you just say, hey, I want to talk, let's do peace. Pretty sure there's more peace. There you go. Now, the weighing here is pretty much simple. Number one is because of how you have more political capital by being a pacifist, means that you have a higher chance for you to basically gain all the support in the world that you need to right now, if it ever comes to Russia and China actually invading you. But number two, the chances of de-escalation is much higher. And this is taking governments at their best when Russia and China were actually wanting to invade Japan in the first instance, right? It's better for peace talks to happen when you actually when you don't have two guns pointing at each other and antagonizing each other. But number two, when you actually have more peaceful talks by not militarizing yourself, Japan will have much more allies because of how you're being a pacifist. First question, we win. Second question, which side will have more over-militarization? America will force Japan to over-militarize just like how they did to South Korea. This is because the relationship between Japan and America has always been visceral and it's always been about like economy. And this has been stated by Shakir, right? The impacts here are threefold. Number one, you become a bigger threat geopolitically because of now countries see you as a as superpower. But number two, Japan needs to funnel more capital to negotiate with China and Russia now. And number three, America is an interventionist, meaning a lot of America would literally call their allies to help Japan into, intervene with the whole conflict. Meaning to say, a larger degree of conflict. With that being said, never been prouder to oppose.
Thank the opposition whip and call upon the op reply. Here. Op reply.
Okay, sorry. Am I audible?
It's a bit soft, but I can hear you.
Okay, I'll speak louder. two clashes, and then I'll give you a comparative. The first clash. At this point in the debate, government has conceded that Russia is actually strong. That means their only claim is that they want to prevent Russian expansionism, which is in the interest of national security. At this point in the debate, they need to prove efficacy. They have to prove why it is likely that when having a better military, Japan will be able to sufficiently combat Russia and China expansion if it so happens. This means that they have to actually put boots on the ground at any point Russia attempts, in their words, to claim islands. Second thing that they have to prove is, at the very least, prove deterrence, and the fact that this military in Japan is going to be so huge that will deter Russia from ever actually harming Japan. They haven't done any of these things. I need now analysis of why the military might of Japan will trump over the military might of Russia, or you have to prove why self-defense for the sake of self-defense is a principle in and of itself. Or thirdly, you have to either bite the bullet and say they're going to get military funding and aid from United States because that's the likely partner for military. At every single point in this debate, you will have harm. If it is true that you haven't proven, if it is true that Russia is expanding dramatically and is really, really destroying Japanese islands, then you haven't proven why the military is going to be able to combat that within these Russian islands. But secondly, if you do not, because you don't bite the bullet and say you're going to take funding from US, it already legitimizes this claim of just you not being able to go against. But if you do take the bite the bullet and say the United States will fund and you will have enough power to actually deter and combat against Russia, then all of our harms manifest then as well. Because now Japan has an ally, which is literally the mortal enemy of Russia. Not only have you put a bullet on your, a target on your back, but you're also siding with the enemy hegemony. This means that if Russian expansionism wasn't real before, once you revoke it, Russian expansionism will definitely be real. Apart from all of the amazing responses Upwhip has already given to you, we have sufficiently proven that it's unlikely that Russia will ever actually invade Japan in status quo or in the future, but it will happen on government side. The second issue is then on the principle. I think it's absolutely disgusting that GovWhip just laughs off the sufferings of the victims during the Japanese imperialism. They just constantly say, well, people don't care about the sufferings of the comfort women in Korea in the past, and people just don't care about the trauma these individuals have done towards the Japanese, towards people all over Asia. We gave you analysis as to how not only do we people, as the product of Japanese imperialism, feel traumatized because of it, but also the Japanese people themselves feel traumatized by it. That's why they're taking responsibility, and that's why they're doing reparations. If the argument on government is to just trade everything off, then we can't just possibly, we can just take responsibility. We don't have to take responsibility for the decisions of our forefathers, but then you're just against reparations in general, which means you already lost the principal claims here. The impact here is, number one, if you lose this, you are unable to call out anybody. But secondly, if you are giving up this principle and just going to militarize, then you can no longer be a peace broker in that region. You put a target on your back, and all of these things manifest as well. We have won the principal claim. Their coercion argument just literally doesn't make sense, because we didn't repeal this in 1980s when there was no American coercion at all, because it was past Reconstruction. We're not going to repeal it now. The comparative and opposition is very simple. Number one, at least on our side, we have a higher likelihood of de-escalating conflict because we don't put a target on our back. Number two, we prevent harm because Russia is not going to expand towards Japanese islands. And number three, we have a higher likelihood to become the peace broker of the world. For all those reasons, we take.
And the opposition reply, and call the final speaker, Gov reply. Here.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Op seems to think that Japan is this tiny island that doesn't really have any economic power. We literally told you that it's the 4th biggest economic power, but the fact is that it's beholden to literally all of its neighbors because of the fact that it doesn't have any military. let's just start and just take a look at opposition's case here. They seem to depend on very extreme characterizations of everything. For example, right, they seem to think that the comparative is always all out war, all out war, all out war. Even if they say in the whip speech that, oh, this debate is not about all out war, suddenly, literally all their comparative is about, oh, Japan is going to get completely destroyed, Nagasaki 2.0 or something, etc. Notice that, panel, that this case coming from Op or the comparative that Op tries to push just simply doesn't make any sense, and therefore this thing will cost them debate because they never took the middle ground, never tried to at least contextualize, understand to us why exactly realistic contextualization. First issue, principle, whether or not it's justified for them to have. Op seems to push that the popularity is the sole reason as to why Article 9 is there, and therefore we ought to push that. Number one, this is untrue. We already told you that Article 9, repealing Article 9 is something that's extremely popular. This is because of the geopolitical reasons that Japan is currently right now. The fact is, Japanese people look at Taiwan and think, ah, shit, there's another country is about to be invaded by China. Ah, shit, the Senkaku Islands are being taken over by China. Obviously, people are scared, and therefore people have the popularity, or people have the ability, or obviously people can rationalize that, hey, maybe we should start to have the ability for us to defend themselves. But also the fact that, war is brewing throughout the world because of the Ukraine conflict. I think then that the popularity argument makes more sense on the side. But even if you don't buy that, we already told you that it doesn't make sense for the Japanese people to be punished by the sins of their grandfathers, even though we agree that World War II and Japan was horrible. But the fact is that most of the people that are power back then are dead, and they don't really matter now. Now what matters is the people that are born after that, and they need to be able to defend themselves and choose for themselves. Thirdly, we already told you that often, because of the fact that they are unable to defend themselves, they are also coerced, right? That means that if Gulf wants to argue about how their ability to choose, we say that we protect it better because of the fact that we have the ability to defend ourselves, and therefore we're able to protect against coercion, like, for example, countries like China or like Russia, that probably can force Japan away from the negotiating table or just simply take away territory from them. We think that we protect choice better. Now, moving on to the second issue of the principle. What are the chances of expansionism, right? Notice here that this is what causes them to lose this debate, because they often ignore the realistic contextualization of this debate. We told you that China is already becoming expansionist in places like, for example, the South China Sea, Taiwan, or the Senkaku Islands, and Russia becoming more and more expansionist in the Kyril Islands and trying to take more and more offshore areas, etc., on the sea. We say that, then we think then that and secondly, we'll give you incentive structures of these countries, right? The fact is that they're structured as strongman countries, the strongman leaders, which means that they always want to have an incentive to expand into territory because they want to prove to its people that they're strong and remain in power. We told you then that on a balance of probability signing from side government, there's already a great chance of expansionism into Japanese territory. Given that, who is able to stop expansionism? Op seems to say that when you have military power, suddenly everyone wants to take your territory, suddenly everyone wants to go to war with you, etc. Notice that this is extreme analysis, and I pointed out in the PI by asking, if it is true that everyone wants to not trade with people with militaries, then no one in the world will be able to trade with each other. I think that makes sense. But number two, if we look at the cost-benefit analysis, given that expansionism is likely to happen, who is more likely to bring it to the negotiation table? When there's Article 9 and no ability for you to defend yourself, Russia doesn't need to go to the negotiating table, or China doesn't need to go to the negotiating table. They just take the island, and there's no cost to them because there's no standing military to fight them. In our side, even if the military cannot completely stave off Japan, we say that there is a harm for them to take over the island because they will kill. There will be military assets destroyed. There will be troops that are killed. Therefore, that means that on a balance of probability, China is more likely to go, or Russia is more likely to go into the negotiating table before going into expansionism. For all of those reasons, proud to propose.